Hurling on Off the Ball.
With Board Gosh Energy. Hurling, it's anyone's game.
Now you're very welcome back. So just the 2 more weekends to go of inter-county hurling. We have the final in 2 weeks' time, and our semi-final weekend is very much here. We have Limerick Galway 6 o'clock on Saturday, and then Kilkenny against Clare is 4 o'clock Sunday. So very much a carbon copy of last year's semi-final lineup as Limerick go for 4 in a row. Very happy to say Jamesie O'Connor with us once again. Hey Jamesie.
Yo, hurlings.
And got a message from Paul Murphy saying, Hurling Pod, it's not up to scratch. Questions average. My co-pundit average. Can we get down to some serious business at semi-final stage? So Paul, I'm more than happy to facilitate.
Yeah, it's great relief, to be honest, Joe. So delighted to be on. Yeah. I believe Will O'Callaghan might be listening nearby, so I have to be careful what I say.
Oh, I hope he is. Come here. It's a strange landscape at the moment in TV world and online streaming world. It had escaped my attention until Nick just reminded me outside. So, am I right in saying you two were on BBC Two Northern Ireland this weekend because they have both semi-finals?
That's correct. Yeah, we're just chatting about it before we came on.
Okay, very good. So it's hard to keep track of you, Jamesie.
Yeah, Joe, got the call last week. Wasn't expecting it, but so asked the question and agreed to join. And nice to be in Croke Park as part of the coverage. You usually have a good view from up there. So yeah, looking forward to it. Looking forward to working with Paul and the lads. Yeah,
no, it should be good. I mean, we associate BBC so much with the football, so good to see a bit of hurling get some airtime. Semi-finals are curious beasts. Lonely place to lose, quickly forgotten. Your semi-final record, Paul? I'm suspecting not bad.
To my memory, I don't think I lost one. Lost quarterfinals, all right, but I don't think, to my memory, we lost the semi-finals. So yeah, I suppose we were always very fortunate when we got to semi-finals. We probably had that bit of momentum. We always had a bit of experience just through the generation of players that were there that had won semi-finals, knew how to close them out because they are a different animal to other games. So we probably always had that bit of experience and youth in them. And then once you have a few years of building up maybe a bit of a track record of not losing them, that does feed into the psyche as well. So yeah, thankfully enough, look, we were lucky enough to, once we got into semi-finals, put ourselves in a great position. I even think back to the semi-final against Waterford in 2016 and even bringing that to a replay and closing it out in a replay. So look, I was fortunate to be part of good teams that knew how to win semi-finals.
Yeah, you sure were. Horrible games, Jamesie. At least the final, nobody wants to lose a final either, obviously. But you get the build-up, you get the suit, you get the occasion. You're remembered. People can list off the finalists. It's that bit harder to remember semi-finalists. It's kind of a horrible prospect in many ways for players.
It is, yeah. And look at obviously the 3 games against Offaly in 98. I don't remember those, Joe. And 99, I broke my arm, and so missed the Munster final against Cork, and we lost that. And I kind of got back for, I think we did playoff against Galway, whatever, and we got over that, and we Kilkenny in the 99 semi-final and lost that. So yeah, look at it's so near and yet so far. And at least, as you say, if you make the big day, you're there on the big stage, and the year, I suppose, look, you still obviously want to win it, but yeah, semi-finals are not the place you want to lose. And funnily, Joe, the worst thing you can probably do is shoot the lights out in the semi-final. Their games, really, it's all about getting over the line, getting there, having things to work on, but certainly hoping to have your best stuff for the final. So I've been involved with plenty of teams where we've shot the lights out, as I said, and fired on all cylinders in the semi-final and just not performing in the final, then I lost it. So it's about getting over the line, getting to what's the 23rd of July this year. I was going to say the first one in September, and at least give yourself a chance.
Yeah. The other aspect, Paul, here is it's a repeat of last year. We were looking for precedent, and I think in 15-16 Kilkenny had Waterford and Galway had Tipperary as well. Is it the kind of thing where in 16 you're like, oh, we had Waterford this time last year? Would you go back and pay any heed to the game the previous year, or is that just different world, long forgotten, or does it kind of loom large in your thinking?
Yeah, the only reference we would have made to the semi-final in 2015 is that Waterford didn't perform really in that game. It was a very flat game, very poor game to watch. And that would have been the only reference we would have made from an emotional point of view, that, this Waterford team felt they would have left a performance behind them last year, whether they would have beat us or not. they didn't even give it a chance really on the day. And in 2016, very close to beating us in the first match, and only for we rallied back towards the end, got a draw and beat them the second day. So, I mean, you could definitely have links between this Kilkenny and Clare game, particularly because Clare definitely will feel that they didn't perform last year. And that game for me is a bit of an unknown entity at the moment, really, because you could look back. You'll definitely look back at Galway and Limerick and say, look, there are parts here, and Galway did put Limerick under the cosh at different stages. But Kilkenny and Clare can't do that with each other. And if anything, it bodes more well for Clare, because a lot of those players in the dressing room will have more days behind them than they do ahead of them at the moment. And we'll be looking at it and going, look, we thought when we won 2013 that, the future was bright, and it absolutely was. But maybe we haven't, achieved what we should have. And here's an opportunity. And last year, I'm sure, will have left a bad taste. So that's something that definitely the Clare players will be using. And I think the Kilkenny lads will be aware of it as well. But in terms of the actual physical hurling side of it and the tactics, both sides or all sides will be looking at the last few weeks and few months more so, because that's more relevant. Yeah. But from an emotional point of view, you may reference that. And certainly I'd say Waterford did it against us in 2016.
Yeah. Well, let's start on the Saturday then, because first up, 6:00, it's Limerick against Galway. I mean, there's a degree here of like the walking wounded. You need to set the context, who's missing and for whom. So Limerick have their concerns. Obviously, they've been without Sean Finn for the season. But Declan Hannon at 6 is the big talking point. Henry Shefflin has confirmed, by the way, Jason Flynn is now out for the season, hamstring in training, and obviously David Burke is out as well. But the big talking point, I suppose, Jamesie, from a Limerick-Galway point of view in terms of injuries, is who fills in for Limerick at 6, who replaces Declan Hannon. First of all, what's Hannon so good at? What makes him so difficult to replace?
I think just probably his leadership, Joe. I mean, he's obviously in the central pivotal position. I mean, sometimes it's not that he does a huge amount in the game itself. I mean, look, obviously he's played well. He's got scores going forward. But I think have really been the one line that's really been on top of things and played really well. So, I mean, I think obviously one option is to switch Morrissey. Mr. Dependable, the guy who will solve whatever problem you've got, to shift him to 6 and bring in Richie English at cornerback. And I think that's what they're more likely to do. I mean, Richie English had a really good league. He's tough. He's not a guy you'd enjoy spending 70 minutes on at cornerback. The other option then is to bring in Colin Coughlin either at centre back or more likely at wing back, and shift either Burns or Kyle Hayes to the middle. So they have those options. Now Coughlin he's like Burns. He's 6'4", 6'5". He's really good in the air. He's really good going forward, but he's not exceptionally quick. And I'd have issues about his pace when he's turning going in the other direction. So they've obviously had time. They've known that Hannon wasn't going to be available, so they've had time obviously to look at the options and probably go with whoever's going best at training. So it's not like they don't have the resources to replace the guys that they're missing, but it does mean you're having to shuffle the deck, and arguably it limits their options at the back. I mean, obviously Cian Lynch, there's still question marks as to where his hamstring is at. But Cathal O'Neill obviously is an option. I mean, David Reedy, got 3 massive points in the Munster final in the second half. Obviously set up the perfect pass for Gillan for the goal as well. And Reedy was the guy coming off the bench that got 3 points at the death against Galway last year, which was what separated the side. So, it'd be very, very hard on him if he was dropped. But, they have options as up front. Adam English from the under-20s, again, is a really good player. He's a guy that's going to have a future with them. So I think a bit of shuffling will obviously take place. And as I said, from my perspective, I think Richie English, Dan Morrissey to centre back is probably the more likely option. But at the same time, the full backline has been so good, you want to upset that. So interesting to see what they'll do. But they've had time. They've had 4 weeks. It's not like this. He pulled a hamstring on Thursday night, and you're trying to make a late decision. So I'd imagine it's one that they've had plenty of time to get right.
Yeah, Paul. It's been talked about a lot who replaces Hannon, but I guess we have to find something to talk about the week of a match. So maybe it's taking on like an inflated level of importance in the way we're talking about it. How significant for you is Hannon's absence? Like, is this a big problem for Limerick or no?
I wouldn't call it a problem, no. I mean, certainly one of the things we've spoken about with Limerick is the embarrassment of riches they have really in many positions. But would I call it a problem? No, I think the reason a lot of people are speaking about it at the moment is because anybody's looking for a chink in the armour with Limerick, and any indication whereby we think today could be the day that somebody topples them in a really important match. And having, their leader not present there in the day, of course that's going to see as an influence, particularly the fact that Cian Lynch isn't potentially down at the other end or may play a small part, who knows. But I think the significance with Hannon missing, like Jamesie touched on all the points there, like he directs the show from centre back, and that's something that's very hard to describe in one particular way. Like we would go back at 20 years or Jamesie's time, you have Seanie McMahon in at centre back, and usually your centre back, let's say 20 years ago, was your best defender, really, well, give or take, but generally that was the idea. But at the moment, centre back is kind of the person who directs the rest of the people in front of him, left or right, and kind of makes sure that nobody is leaving gaps coming through that defence. And is like James saying about Ollie Baker, off the ball, what are they actually doing about speaking to players and getting the players in the right position? I've heard a lot of people speak about who might sit into that number 6 jersey, and like Will O'Donoghue was mentioned. Like Will O'Donoghue is, like, as he's been described, a Terminator. Basically, he's a savage player. But Will O'Donoghue is the type of player, when a ball breaks, he's tuned in for the ball and he goes in tackling for the ball. And that type of attribute sitting at 6 might necessarily suit, because the potential to drift from there and leave a gap up through the centre mightn't suit. So like John Kiley and Paul Kinnerk might be looking at it going, okay, well, who's the next person up who will, is a leader in the centre, who players will listen to, and also will have the calmness and the presence of mind during the big parts of the game to hold that position and give the guidance to the players around them. So you're not just looking at it from a point of view of saying who's the next best hurler, physical hurler at number 6. There's a lot more attributes to that, and I think what they'll be looking for in a player is that, come 70 minutes on Saturday evening, that we're not speaking about who was number 6, because they just did a seamless show. They just went away, hurled their game. I wouldn't be surprised to see Alexa Darragh O'Donovan there, to be honest, as well, because that area of 5 to 12, like that area, and something maybe we don't speak about a whole lot, you need ball winners there, players who can physically get on the ball, and that's a very tough thing to do. Some players, when the game opens up, they find themselves on the ball, but who can win rucks, who can get on it? And Darragh O'Donovan's an excellent player for them. If you look at the amount of possessions Darragh O'Donovan gets in a game, it'd be around 20, 22, and he might even be nominated for man of the match, but he gets on ball, starts an attack, and Limerick uses it as a launch pad. So yeah, I'd look at that for the area where they may look, and I even said the likes of Barry Nash. I wouldn't be shocked to see Barry Nash out there, because Richie English is sitting there, and I agree with James. Look, Richie English is, not to say one of the most underrated hurlers in the country, he's one of the most underutilised. He'd be on any other inter-county team probably in the country. He's an exceptional defender. So there may be an opportunity now to push out the likes of Barry Nash into that position. But it's just intriguing, because we've known so many of the things we've known about this Limerick team have been predictable over the last few years. But now we have one bit of uncertainty. So it is interesting to see what way not only Limerick react, but Galway react to it.
Yeah. A couple of texts in, by the way. I think, to be fair, Jamesie, you referenced this when we touched on semi-finals. Jamesie, one of the very few people who's won and lost a semi-final in the same year, which is a claim to fame. And then, how's James Skehill going to feel now that you've clearly picked Murphy as your preferred hurling pod pundit, wonders Graham? Look, he'll get over it. He's a resilient type, Skehill. He'll take it on the chin. I know he will. And on Limerick then generally, and before we get to Galway, 2023's Munster games. This is Limerick's season, Jamesie. For the team that, couldn't be beaten, and John Kiley felt there was a softening up exercise early on. 2-point win against Waterford. I appreciate they were down a man, but still, Waterford weren't at it this year in any great way. 2-point win against Waterford, 1 point loss to Clare, draw against Tipperary, 1 point win against Cork, 1 point win against Clare in the Munster final, and lots of people increasingly feel Clare left that Munster final behind them. So, they can't be comfortable. They can't be thinking, geez, we're clearly ahead of the rest here. They know they are very beatable in a real way this year.
I think, yeah, Joe. I mean, like, every game in Munster was a real battle, and I think, look at the level Limerick set the standard. I think, in fairness to the other teams, whether it's from a physical preparation or an S&C perspective, tactical perspective, all the other teams in Munster have probably come up to the bar, and Limerick with a game probably that everyone targets in terms of throwing the kitchen sink at them, because of obviously the pain, the misery they've inflicted on the rest of us over the last 5 or 6 years. So look, there's no question about it. I mean, 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago they were pretty much winning these games comfortably. I mean, obviously saw Cork off very comfortably in Páirc Uí Chaoimh last year. I mean, put Cork to the sword in the All-Ireland final in 2021, and they haven't been doing that to teams. Now, obviously, are they freewheeling to the same extent they were 2, 3 years ago? I don't think they are, and a certain amount of that is can you sustain those levels 5 and 6 years year after year after year. And probably I suppose look at their parallels with, Paul and Kilkenny in terms of, the great team and the 4 in a row team heading for 5 in a row, and the challenges that brought in terms of just, getting yourself up, Joe, year after year after year with every team. You were there All-Ireland finals. So, and obviously the injuries then, compound that. But they're still thereabouts. I mean, there's been no surrender. Every day they go out there, they're still there. Even the game the Clare won in the Gaelic grounds, that game could arguably have gone the other way, had a ball bounce the other way on occasion. So you have to admire their resilience. You have to admire their ability to keep going into the well. But at some point, you have to ask the question, what has Munster taken out of them? And I mean, there were always going to be 2 big games, whether it was, Galway or Kilkenny in the semi-final, or irrespective of who it is in the final. 2 massive tests still wait, and you just feel at some point, is the bucket going to come up empty? And I just don't know if they're going to win the All-Ireland. And it would be some All-Ireland if they do pull it off, Joe. And I suppose look at the big dividend from winning the Munster final was the time it bought them, the 4 weeks, because to go 2 weeks, play Dublin, and then have to go 2 weeks again, might have been a bridge too far. But certainly I'd imagine they did nothing the week after the Munster final. And obviously, Kylie spoke in his interview post-match that they knew exactly what the schedule was going to be, and there's comfort in that in terms of knowing what you have to do, knowing what's worked in the past, and knowing then that there's a level of comfort. All these guys have been here in Croke Park, they have a brilliant record obviously in semi-finals and big matches. So like, it's all, you can talk all you want about them not being at the same level they were at and been very, very beatable, but someone still has to come and knock them off in a real big knockout game. And Galway certainly had the opportunity last year. I mean, this game was level, Joe, after 66 minutes, and Galway had the opportunities late on, didn't take them. Limerick took their chances, and that's what made the difference. So, Limerick, I think, look, the Limerick players know this is going to be probably a 1-score game at the weekend. But at the end of the game last year, Galway blinked, Limerick didn't, and they still have that innate self-belief, that self-confidence that, when it comes down to squeaky bum time, they're not going to be found wanting, and their players will make good decisions and the right decisions on the ball. So, yeah, they're beatable. They're certainly beatable, and the Munster campaign has shown that. But they're still the champions, and as I said, you really have to take your hat off to the resilience and the courage and the mental fortitude that they've shown and had to show in Munster, certainly.
Yeah, for sure. And you could definitely make the argument that the trajectory is good, that they're getting better as the Munster Championship continues. Do you agree with Jamesie, Paul? Do you see this as 1-score game territory?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of it does have to do with, I suppose people are talking, but maybe Limerick have regressed a small bit, not to say regress, but maybe they just haven't kicked on further away from the pack. I just think the pack has caught up a small bit. Teams have had a lot of time to have a look at what Limerick are doing, what way to, I suppose, stem what they're doing, and haven't always managed it, but have shown indicators that there's measurables there that you can get at them, which, other teams take solace. And exactly what Jamesie said there, like any team goes out against Limerick, that's their All-Ireland final. Like, if you look at Waterford very flat in Leinster or in Munster. They bet Tipperary, but Tipperary were very poor that day. But the one day they turned up was for Limerick, and that's because any day you face Limerick, you want to get a measure of where you are yourself, and there's no better test than Limerick. So they've been tested really, really hard. But those 1 point and 2 point wins, like they weren't accidents either. Like they just know there's a trend. Like they know how to close out the game. And people may say that, okay, Clare threw it away in the last minutes. You could look at that. You could maybe say that, but maybe it was the experience there just to close it out. And it is something that Clare, I do believe, have learned from what they're doing. Like they're learning every day they go out. But Limerick are at that position, whereas the likes of, let's say, when we played them in 2019, maybe they didn't know how to close out the game there just to get the point ahead, but they learned in the meantime. So, they know how to be smart, they know how to slow it down, they know how to, kick on, and they're not afraid to do it. The likes of, you can introduce Reedy and these players, and as soon as they get on, they have an impact and they score 3 points. So they just have that quality about them.
Sorry to interrupt, I'm curious as you're talking there. In your Kilkenny period, can you remember that nagging feeling or that sense, be it Tipperary or another side, these are getting closer to us? I can feel it. They're getting closer. It must, I don't know, does it create a sense of anxiety or is it extra fuel? But you just must have felt it. And I'd say Limerick players can feel it now. So you might have a sense of where their heads are as the pack close in a touch.
Yeah, we never pictured it as that a team were closing in. You know, you might face Galway at some stage, and you always gave them the respect of saying these lads believe they can beat us, and they can if we're off by a percent. Or Tipperary said these lads hate us, and there's a good rivalry, and we perform in great matches, and anytime we play, there's only a point or two in it. So you always had that healthy respect, but you never viewed it from the point of view that you were out in front and that these lads were chasing you, because probably an unhealthy place to be, because you probably thought you had a bit of room for leeway there to make mistakes. Whereas if you just viewed that, where are this team we're playing, where are they dangerous and where can they hurt us? And if you view them like that and know where you're strong and say, right, well, we're going to play Galway physically, they're a very big team, we need to match them physically, we don't need to get drawn into battles here and slow the game down, we need to move the ball quickly. Or if Tipperary, we'd be saying, look, we're going to go man for man here, they have excellent players, we have excellent players, but we're going to try and tie down Corbett or whoever. So like different games took on different things, but I always felt it wasn't beneficial to think that, well, we're ahead because we won the All-Ireland last year, we're ahead, because then you think, well, I can afford to make a few mistakes because we just have that bit of room. So and you know what, I can see indications from what Limerick are doing. If you look back after the Munster final, Darragh Donovan said, everybody wrote us off, and I believe him. That's what he fully believed that, even though we were all, as a public, we were going, no, we weren't writing you off. Or you see Kylie as well stoking the fire, saying that saying a few comments that would get a reaction. Because you don't want to be comfortable. You don't want to get comfortable where you feel that everybody loves us, we're capable of beating everyone, because that's the day you get caught. So emotionally, you're keeping yourself out of that pocket where you want people to feel that they're against you. You want the crowd to feel they're against you, the referee. You want all that, because you'll stay on edge, you'll stay fiery, and you're also not pushing it so far that you're getting down on yourself, thinking, the whole place hates us and we're not going to get anything. So when I saw that, I could see the
parallels. The only difference being everybody did hate Kilkenny, whereas I think people do like Jamesie, Galway then is a final word in this game. The win against Tipperary, so they bitter pill of that Leinster final defeat, last minute goal. They play Tip. People are kind of saying, I felt to myself, geez, can Galway regroup and have Tipperary, who we expected more from, then Limerick, then a final? That's going to be very tough. Tipperary proved to be very flat. Cathal Mannion, from memory, cleaned up, got on a lot of ball in defence. The kind of worry for Galway would be that the scoreline flattered Tipperary, that they almost kept them in the game too long. They were 8 points up at one stage and allowed Tipperary back into it. Conor Whelan, in great form, scored 1-4, but they had 18 wide, so I think a 50% conversion rate. So look, it was a win and an important win, but a lot of room for improvement there as well, it'd be the sense. Maybe that's just where they want to be, I don't know.
Yeah, I think like the Leinster final, I mean, it was a devastating way to lose. I watched it back during the week, and I mean, some of the Galway players, when the ball ended up in that bottom corner under the Hogan stand, Joseph Grow, I think Grow-Back and Ernie had a chance to clear it. Joseph Cooney had it in his hand, and they were out on their feet. And you got to give Kilkenny credit, I suppose, for the relentless pressure that they put. But I mean, Joe, they must have been gutted coming out of Croke Park. So I think, I saw an interview with Pádraig Mannion, I think a couple of days afterwards, where he clearly had moved on. And I think that's the value of the experience that's in that Galway dressing room. And I think obviously credit to Henry as well. They'd all moved on. It happened. Got to deal with it now. And obviously, there was going to be, I felt, a more battle-hardened Munster team awaiting them in third place for whoever lost the Leinster final this year. And credit to Galway, they were up for it. And, you look at Henry, will say, for example, okay, he's only into his second year in managerial terms, compared to, we'll say, John Kiley, who's into his seventh. Yeah. But in terms of big game experience, I mean, no one arguably has more big game experience than Henry, given the amount of huge matches he played in, and he got it absolutely tactically spot on, in every sense for the Tipperary game, because obviously they said, look, this Tip team needs goals to win. They absolutely took that away. Mannion was sitting so deep, behind his half back line at times that everyone else was just touch tight. It just meant they just had to break the ball, and there was invariably a Galway player plus one there to kind of pick it up. And they had 18 wides, and clearly they should have put that game to bed a long time before they ultimately did. But they still controlled it, and you'd be more concerned. I probably said this to you before. Yeah. If they weren't creating those opportunities. Now, clearly, those efficiency levels, they do the same thing at the weekend. They're going to be beaten by 6 points. You can't afford that level of inefficiency against Limerick. And more importantly, it's one thing having wides. It's another thing making bad shot decisions in the first place. And, I look back at the Munster final, for example, and Clare had probably 5 or 6 bad decisions on the ball where fellas shot when there were other options on. Limerick accounted one. Cathal O'Neill had a kind of a Hail Mary effort, but every one of the other chances that they missed, the shot was the right decision. They just didn't execute it. So from a Galway perspective, that's got to be better, because the margins obviously come down, the closer you get to the 23rd of July. So that won't be good enough. But in so many other respects, Joe, I give Galway a brilliant chance of the weekend because, I look back to ourselves and Tip, for example, we obviously beat them in the 2 games in 97. We didn't play in 98, but 99, Nicky was over them. They should have beaten us in the drawing game down in Páirc Keeve. We hammered them in the replay, gave a really good performance. But I certainly sense that, look, at this crowd are breathing down our necks now, and they're getting closer. Yeah. And they had that real hunger, that we couldn't match them in 2000. And when you look at, this Galway, I suppose, Limerick relationship, obviously there's the All-Ireland final defeat in 2018. There's a semi-final in 2020. Obviously there's a semi-final last year. And if you're Galway now, or a Galway player, if you're Dahi Burke or Joseph Cooney or Pádraig Mannion, where you want that second All-Ireland and the clock is ticking on your career, you're certainly into the twilight probably, or the latter stages of it, payback is coming and payback is imminent in terms of sorting these Limerick boys out. And that's the mentality I think that's going to be in their dressing room. So yeah, and I think I saw signs that, look at Nyland, I thought he made some really good decisions late on where he gave the ball to the guy in the better position. I think Kevin Cooney's going to be a good player for them. Jack Grealish, Darren Morrissey, all these guys now are a year further into their inter-county careers. And Limerick minus Finn, minus Hannon, minus maybe Cian Lynch, are they as strong? So there's no reason why Galway should have any doubts about their ability to win the game on Saturday evening, but they've got to execute and they've got to be more efficient than they were in the Gaelic grounds 2 weeks ago.
Yes. Paul, who's winning this one-score game then?
Look, my head at the moment would have to say Limerick, just because they've found a result. I'd agree with Jamesie. Galway have an absolutely huge opportunity here, and I do think they can go and turn them over. They just need to tick a lot more boxes than they did against Tipperary, which they can do. They absolutely can. Their trajectory is headed in the right direction. They've learned a huge lesson since the Leinster final and maybe have that bit more of emotion in the tank now as well. It's a free shot at Limerick, so they have a great chance, but you have to just look at Limerick's results and say they've always found a way over the last while. So I have to say, Limerick by 2 points.
Yeah, there's sort of a degree of until Limerick are beaten, you tip Limerick.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Yeah, I get it. Jamesy, similar kind of vibe for you?
Yeah, I'm going to go for Galway, Joe.
All right, okay.
And I don't say that with any degree of certainty. What's interesting for me is the last 2 games, the Cork match and the Munster final, the Limerick half forwards just abandoned ship out to midfield or beyond. And it was very much a case of, okay, let's just get this into Galan. Let's keep things tighter. Let's not concede goals. Let's make ourselves very, very hard to break down, and then depend on Galan to be the main, focal point up front. And from a Galway perspective, I think Dahi Burke is probably better equipped to handle him and handle the space that might be in front of him than maybe Garrod. So that's a big matchup that they've got to get right. But Haggerty certainly isn't in the form that he was last year. Tom Morrissey's been really consistent. Flanagan, Peter Casey, again have been a bit in and out of it. So I think if they hold Galan, I give them a great chance. And if they take their chances, who knows? Maybe they do enough to win.
Well, hopefully it lives up to its billing. Fellas, we're going to take a very short break. Paul Murphy, Jamesie O'Connor staying with us. Back in just 1 sec.
Hurling on Off the Ball
with Bord Gosh Energy. Hurling, it's anyone's game.
Hurling on Off the Ball
with Bord Gosh Energy. Hurling, it's anyone's game.
You're very welcome back, and our hurling coverage is with thanks to Bord Gosh, and they've been uncovering stories to highlight the positive impact hurling has on people's lives. You can check out bordgoshenergy.ie, BGE, GAA, and we should mention as well the hurling pod the Thursday before the All-Ireland final are going to be at the Bord Gosh Energy Theatre. Will and James Skell and Paul Murphy and special guest Joe Canning. More to be announced. offtheball.com/events if you want to go along. Should be a brilliant evening. All the proceeds go to charity as well, so do get involved, do get along, and hurl abuse at Paul Murphy and James Scale and Will. So we have Kilkenny against Clare once again. Paul, tell us about the Derek Ling that you know.
Look, Derek is just, I suppose, when he came into the dressing room, I would have very briefly been on a training panel when Derek was, I suppose, in his prime. And just like, I mean, the first thing you think of is he's just a gentleman of a fella. He's a great fella. One of the first lads, I suppose, kind of, put the arm around the shoulder to me when I arrived in the dressing room as a 19-year-old to kind of say, listen, go on, enjoy it. That's what we're all here for. A very much a relaxed type of fella. Always his demeanour, really, when you're around him. But, particularly for the few years, it was never going to be easy to fill the boots of like Martin Fogarty and Mick Dempsey and these lads and the influence they had in the dressing room. But like Derek was one of those lads that were brought in, and he was just, every player just had a great word about him because he had a great ability just, when things were going good or things were going bad, just to pick a few words. And he never spoke too much. It was just the right amount. And, there were some days where you might feel you weren't getting to a few balls, and he'd come over and he might say to you, look, you're a different player when you're out in front. You have to hurl from there and don't forget that. And suddenly it would click with you. And the next night you're in with training. So he has this, he just has this demeanour about him that players respect him, first of all, of what he's done through the game. But he gives a lot of respect back to players. Then you listen when he's talking. He's not dialed up in that he's over emotional in the dressing room, but he's also not so laid back that he's just laissez-faire going around. He just strikes it so well. But look, the Derek that I know was excellent for me through my career. Anytime you met him afterwards, he'd always make time to chat to you. But a very driven fella as well, a fella who's very well organised and very thoughtful about the procedures he was putting in place or his plans. So, I think for every Kilkenny supporter, particularly lads that worked with him, when we heard that he was going in as manager, he just went, that's exactly the perfect fit for Kilkenny. And yeah, he's just an all-round great fella.
Yeah, been very struck, Jamesie. He hasn't tried to mimic Cody in terms of his dealings with the media even, so I don't get to see behind the curtain. Obviously we just get to see the front-facing Ling, but there's been no sense that, well, look, this is how we treat the media in Kilkenny, this is how we do things, so I'm just going to fit that mould. He's been very approachable, affable, relaxed, it's kind of a mature thing to do. He's put his own stamp on that environment very quickly.
Yeah, he's his own man. Again, obviously, no more than probably than Brian Lohan, Lognan would have been a massive influence on him, and Cody would have been a huge influence, obviously, on Derek managing right throughout his career. So, obviously he knows what works for Kilkenny. And all the values in terms of the work rate, the honesty, the doing things the right way and the Kilkenny way. He's obviously going to keep all those things, but at the same time bring, his own obviously experiences and his own, twist on things as well. And I think the guys he's got with him, Peter Barry obviously is more of a contemporary of mine than maybe Michael Rice would have been. But Peter was again a leader, a guy who would have been hugely respected in that Kilkenny dressing room. And one of Cody's main generals and go-to guys. So, Derek has other people in his backroom team that have been there, that have done it, that, I'm sure are well able to give plenty of counsel as well. But you've got to be impressed, with what he's done. And certainly the Leinster final, you saw afterwards, what it meant to him. I suppose you saw what it meant to Cody to sit in the stand when the camera panned him. But all those, look at the way Kilkenny have played, it's been a seamless transition. And I think the league final, is, there's no better example, Joe, I think of Derek's management than that, because you just got the sense that it was parked, it was move on, okay, it happened, let's take the learnings from it. But there was no sense of panic or no sense of dwelling on it. They just moved on, and it was all about being where they are, Joe, on Sunday in the All-Ireland Semi Final. With their best hurling arguably in front of them rather than behind them, and that's where they are. And he's done whatever's been expected of him, and I'm not surprised that's the way it's worked out for him. He was that way as a player. He was a guy you respected. He was top class, a man of few words with his actions and talking on the pitch, and he's done a good job.
Yeah. So we're all a bit guilty, Paul, of scoreboard journalism. So Cillian Buckley scores the goal and it's, well, Galway, write them off now. There's no, that's just not good enough, and they're going to struggle now to go much further, pick themselves up. Cillian Buckley doesn't score that goal, and we're saying, well, Kilkenny, not much of a Leinster championship, lose to Galway, let's write them off. So unlike Munster, where we have all these games and you can get a real sense of a team, I don't have a great sense of how good Kilkenny are. So how good are Kilkenny? Where are they based on, leave aside, let's imagine the Cillian Buckley goal didn't happen, it went a foot wide. What are we saying about Kilkenny?
Yeah, look, I suppose considering we're at the semi-final stages now, like any team at the start of the year, if you were to ask them where would you want to be at this stage, you say, first of all, we want to be in a semi-final and we want to be there with our stock rising. Like if you're to compare to other teams, if you look at Tip, for example, Tipperary were flying it very early on in the league, and huge indications there. They weren't really putting a foot wrong. You were saying big indications that these lads could go and win the All-Ireland because, they really seem to be going really well, and even start off in Munster going really well. But you'd have to wonder, was it a case of peaking too early? And I know, people will sift through the ashes of what happened for Tipperary's year, but part of it you maybe would have to look at was they were one of the first teams going really well at the start of the year. Whereas if you look forward and you look at, Galway's, Clare's, Kilkenny's, let's say leave Limerick out of it, weren't necessarily ticking too well at the start of the league, but gradually kind of built into it. I'd absolutely agree with the Leinster final that one puck of a ball, it's kind of crazy that people suddenly write a team off or build a team up with one puck of a ball. Because I was saying it more so on the hurling pod from a Galway point of view, that, people were writing off Galway straight away, and you're going, well, Galway were 8 points down at one stage, scored 111 to 4 points against Kilkenny in a period. That's savage going. And Galway would have been looking at that game to say, we can perform like that when we put our heads to it, but it's not good enough what we're doing against teams giving them a bit of a run on us. Likewise, I think what Kilkenny will have been happy to do after that Leinster final is say, okay, look, people are distracted by Cillian Buckley having scored a goal and we won the game and it's brilliant, and we have the first cup, which is also probably, to a degree important for Derek Ling. Like, that's done because the narrative could come down the road that, following Cody, when are you going to get your first trophy and so on. So that was nearly a distraction, but I've no doubt that the backroom team, exactly like Jamesy's mentioned there, your Peter Barry's and these lads set really high standards. Michael Rice, Peter Donovan, these lads, they will have said, yeah, absolutely right, we won the match, great. Now we have 4 weeks to prepare. In that 4 weeks, we have to dissect what happened here in that 15 minutes where Galway shot the lights out and we didn't stop them. And that's really important to work on, because I've no doubt that they wouldn't be coming away going, yeah, we're exactly where we need to be. We won the Leinster final. They're not where they want to be, but they're in an All-Ireland semi-final, having won that game regardless what way it came about, with people coming back from injury, the likes of Richie Reid and so on. So I think they're in a good place. And I don't believe that they would have gotten carried away with a last-minute goal in the Leinster final by thinking that they're a finished quantity and now they can go and win All-Ireland. I've no doubt that in those 4 weeks, they will have pulled themselves apart saying, lads, we're here, but we need to bring it up another few levels to face this Clare team.
Jamesie, I feel like this summer, in your sleep, you've been muttering Conor Cleary's name. I feel like this is your tossing and turning night after night. On the injury front, so John Conlon, who missed last year's semi-final as well, that 12-point defeat to Kilkenny, he is supposedly winning his fitness battle. He took that heavy knock to the head, but it seems he's on course to play. Equally, David McInerney, that leg injury, looks like he'll be good to play, but the word isn't as positive on Conor Cleary. That shoulder injury is now 6 weeks old, and it seems to be he's still unlikely to be in that full-back line. So you've pretty much pinpointed him throughout as being as important a figure as any.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be 7 weeks on Sunday, Joe, since he hurt it against Cork. 3 weeks, I think, to the Clare were offered 3 weeks. Then obviously it's 4 weeks since the Munster final. So, yeah, I mean, listen, every week you'd like to think you'd like to think he's a week closer to recovery. Now, he arguably has a chance maybe of making it the weekend, but he's still, as I said, shoulders are notoriously complicated, and he was in serious discomfort going off. So yeah, we're likely to be without him. There might be a small chance that he'll feature. There's absolute nothing again out of the camp. Nobody seems to know what the story is. John Conlon, I think, is going to be okay. David McInerney should be okay. Aidan McCarthy has had his quad injury that again just doesn't seem to have cleared up. So again, I'd imagine he's going to be thereabouts or marginal call. But Cleary is the one, particularly given the aerial ability that Kilkenny have, Joe. So I mean, I even thought there was evidence against Galway at times, and we've seen it maybe all year too. The teams are maybe been a bit more prepared to go direct and go long, and like when you've got TJ on the edge of the square, or Rowan Cody, or Walter Walsh, all guys that are good in the air, able to win their own ball. That's the one part of the field where I have concerns about how we match up. I mean, Cody obviously is in great form. You'd imagine that Rory Hayes might be the one tasked with marking him, but TJ is again another headache, because even the Leinster final, he took off out the fields. Gro McInerney followed him out, and then there's a lot of space inside. We saw Mikey Butler waltzing through on a post, sticking into the back of the net. Killian obviously got the ball in the 21 completely unmarked with space in front of him. So yeah, I mean, these are again the things that are likely to be giving Brian Lohan sleepless nights in terms of how we hold up at the back, because I mean, at halftime last year, Joe, the game was over, 117 to 6 points. Yeah. We were outscored 1-8 to a point in the last 15 minutes of that first half. Now, we were the architects of our own downfall, because we got completely away from what we had done well. We kept hitting long, aimless ball into the Kilkenny full backline, and Hugh Lawler, as I just gobbled it up. We had 11 wides, we dropped 2 into Owen Murphy. The type of stuff that was just dispiriting to watch, and it sucked the energy out of the team. But that was then, this is now. And certainly, and I said this to you before, emotionally and physically, last year's Munster final took a huge toll. That's certainly not the case this year. And, we were a hell of a lot better and more impressive 2 weeks ago against Dublin than we were at the same stage against Wexford when we fell over the line last year. So I think the team is in a much better place. Without Conlon as well, he was a massive loss last year, because he's a spiritual leader. He's just a great guy. He's a guy that's massively respected within the group. So, we're all, I think he's likely to be cleared to play, which is hugely important for us. But yeah, clearly not been there at the edge of the square. Given the weapons Kilkenny have, that is the big conundrum for me. And if our full back line holds up, and if we can hold up there, I give us a great chance. But that is the worry, that given and Kilkenny will know that. Do you know what I mean? Know that, listen, there is maybe a vulnerability there. Especially if Cleary doesn't play. So that's something that, again, that Paul is probably going to, say that Kilkenny have always gone after that in the past. They've exploited where the potential weaknesses might have been and hurt you. Yeah. And you can't make mistakes in there or cough up goals if you're to have any chance to win. Yeah.
What's the flavour, by the way, of the Kilkenny-Clare rivalry?
There's no great beef between the teams, Joe. I mean, we play Kilkenny in the league. Even in my time, I mean, there'd been huge respect for Kilkenny, but we wouldn't have the same familiarity, which often breeds contempt that we'd have had with the Munster teams. But for me, Kilkenny were always the ultimate test. They gave you absolutely nothing. You had to earn everything you got against them. And in some respects, you weren't respected against, by Kilkenny or Kilkenny hurling people until you did it against them in a big game, and that's maybe the way it should be. So, there's massive respect for them down here. And there's nobody under any illusions in Clare as to how tough this is going to be. I mean, we saw that last year, when we had went up to Croke Park with massively high expectations and came away pretty dispirited. But, at the same time, our lads have given us, a couple of great years, and we've had a great summer with them. And there's a feeling that, they're in a good place. They've worked very, very hard, and we're just hoping that they play, to the best of their ability. And if they do that, I think we're not going to be too far away. This is a good team. We've got good players. We've got good forwards. We can hurt you. And certainly against Dublin, there were a lot of positives in terms of the goal chances that we created up front, the way we moved the ball. And if we can get back to that and do what we did well and what got us to where we were this time last year, not get away from it, I think we've a fighting chance.
Oh yeah, I would think everyone thinks that. I mean, even Munster final, free at the end should have been given. It should have been a drawn game against Limerick, who were
and it shouldn't have come down to that, Joe.
No,
it shouldn't. I mean, we 12 wides, we dropped 7 into Nicky Quay. We were 0 from 5 in long range frees. You can't do that in a big game of that magnitude and expect to win.
Paul, what's the Kilkenny perspective generally? I don't just mean this year, but generally when it comes to Clare, complete irrelevance.
No, I wouldn't say irrelevance, but certainly, like Jamesie said, we just don't have the tradition down at the years of meeting. Absolutely, Kilkenny and Clare played in All-Ireland finals, and I was at it in 2002, and particularly the likes of the great teams that Jamesie played in. It was always a great mark for the Kilkenny teams when they were able to beat them. And there was maybe a small bit of a changing of the guard after 95 and 97, and then the likes of Henry and these lads come along. So there certainly was battles down the years, but not so much in recent years. So there's not that contempt, but like there is another test for players here in that it's easy in some ways for Clare and Limerick to get up for each other, or for Kilkenny and Tipperary to get up for each other. But when that vacuum is present, where you're playing for yourself here, that's what Clare and Kilkenny are going to do. You have to perform for yourself in this match, and don't look to be fueled by a contempt for another team. We would have had great battles down over the years at different times with the Clare lads, but yeah, it is certainly one of those, I suppose, one of those matchups, not rivalries, but one of those matchups that there's not a lot to point to in the past, where you'll have lads sitting in the stand saying, remember this time, remember that time. You nearly have to go back to the likes of your 2002 or so on to bring that up. Yeah,
it's funny. I don't have this burst of images from the last 30 years when you say Kilkenny, Clare. It's just not there. So I don't feel, if you're slogging through the mud and some of the Kilkenny players are using Tipperary jerseys to motivate them, I feel like Clare jerseys were well down the list of what was preoccupying you in the winter time, is what I mean.
Yeah, Clare jersey would have been an absolutely fine jersey to wear to a training match, because it wasn't a case of you were wearing a Tipperary jersey in Nolan Park and the lads start giving out to you or whatever, So no, there wasn't that. But certainly I remember when Clare won in 2013, we went down and played them in Ennis in 2014, and I think it was the first game actually that year, so it was very much like a homecoming for the Clare team. We clapped them out into the pitch and all, and I remember though in that match there was a particular kind of a contempt in it, because it was Clare now going on the next step to go, we can go in 2014 final here, but here are the 2012 champions coming up, and a good marker first. And there was a serious bite in those games, and we played them in a relegation final a few years ago. But yeah, there's not there wouldn't be that familiarity of we meet them every single year and always at a big time, and that so I'm sure from Clare's side that would be the same. But nevertheless, look, that poses its own challenge in itself, and I don't think either team, if you're in All-Ireland semi-final, to an extent, a lot of that goes out the window, because the reward everyone will be looking at is going, we can go to an All-Ireland final here if we win it. And that's almost the different angle that this game takes, more than any other game that preceded it. You're now one step away from an All-Ireland, so you can feed off your hatred for another team, or you can do whatever you want. But if the motivation isn't there in the first place to go and perform because the biggest prize is at stake, well, you should probably be looking in the mirror anyway at that case.
No, fair point. Semi-final supersedes any rivalry, I would think, in the main. So final word from you both then, Jamesie. We're not going to have a 12-point defeat. I think everybody feels it's a much closer affair, whichever way it goes. How do you see it going?
Yeah, I think for me, I think defensively, we've that's the question. Can we hold up? Can we contain Cody? Obviously TJ, Mossy Keown if he plays. Tom Phelan, again, is a guy that has a serious wheel, a serious pace. Can we contain that Kilkenny attack? And I mean, even Joe, go back to the Galway match in Nolan Park in the round robin. I mean, Galway, at half time, it appeared that Galway had hurled Kilkenny off the field, and Kilkenny were still a point up. Yeah. They've that unbelievable ability that even when they're not going well, to stay in the fight, stay in the game, manufacture frees, keep the scoreboard ticking over. So I just think that if we can, nullify the threat up front, particularly from a goal perspective, and if we can be more efficient, I give us a great chance. If I was a betting man, Joe, I still put my money on Kilkenny. I mean, you look at the standard, 226 in the National Ireland final. They were right there with Limerick, a Limerick team who played really well on the day. Heading to the last 5 minutes. So I think Kilkenny deservedly are favourites. But I think if Clare bring their best off, and Clare arguably, should have learned more than Kilkenny did from last year's game in terms of their use of the ball, in terms of, we'll see even the matchups. Mikey Butler, you'd assume, will again tag Tony Kelly. Where will Clare play him this year? Maybe they get him out to centre forward. Maybe bring Mikey Butler to midfield. Find a way to get Tony more involved early on. So I give Clare a great chance. If I'm a betting man, I'm still probably favouring Kilkenny.
Okay, interesting. Paul, where are you?
I'm tipping Kilkenny as well, and I don't feel it's my heart taking over my head either. I just feel that again, we didn't learn a whole lot from Clare last year in the game. There's still a question mark over what was it exactly that had them flat in that game. And exactly as Jamesie said earlier, did so many things that we just didn't associate with Clare last year, shooting from distance when there was other options inside and a few different things. So, there's a few things we have still has question marks over Clare from last year. But Kilkenny, I'm happy where they are. They absolutely need to improve on the Leinster final if they want to go and beat this Clare team. And that is an important thing to say as well. The few injuries as well. It's tough for Clare. Like I hope that every player, you know, is fit on Sunday for Clare, because you want both teams to go at it hammer and tongs here, and there'd be no question marks at the 70 minutes. I think it's tough for Cleary, because I've had shoulder injuries previously. They're not easy to come back from. You know, you could be 95% think you're there, and you go out and you puck a ball and the shoulder drops a small bit, and it's just not an easy injury to come back from. So the fact that they have a few injuries, look, Adrian Mullen's missing, but Adrian Mullins was missing for the Leinster final as well, and Kilkenny showed that they had the few players to come on. You know, Walter Welch coming on, I think scoring about 1-4 off the bench. So there was just the indications were there that I think Kilkenny have blooded a few extra players this year that they can use and maybe cut the cloth to measure against the Clare team. But I do think this Clare team are going to perform, and if you see the likes of Tony Kelly, considering he didn't score last year in the match from play, that if he goes out and scores early on, you'll feel the Clare crowd rising to that this is a different day that we have in our hands. So I do think Kilkenny will see that as important, not necessarily to replicate last year and keep them scoreless, but certainly get Kilkenny into the game early on before Tony Kelly most likely scores in the game. The likes of Shane O'Donnell, 4 points last year from play, even though some people would consider it a quiet game for him. So they have so many areas where they can improve, and I believe they will improve. And I do see this just coming down to a very, very tight margins again, but I just feel that, you know, the Kilkenny just have that small bit at the moment, maybe small bit more on the bench to come in and keep that arm's distance at the final whistle. So I'd be giving it by Kilkenny by just 1 or 2 points.
Yeah. Well, look, we can't ask for better than that, fellas, can we? 2 semi-finals, and we're saying probably 1-score games here. I mean, buckle up and enjoy it, and you could wreck your head trying to predict it with too much definity, it seems. So
and it's been the best weekend of the hurling year, Joe. You know, the Saturday, Sunday. I mean, we've had some cracking, you know, I mean, I remember the you know, when Clare drew with Galway, whatever, you know, and it was a fantastic game. And then I think it was a Cork Limerick on the Sunday, you know, surpassed it. It was a true epic.
You almost want like the week to digest the Saturday, and suddenly it's Sunday and you're into the next one, you know. It's that kind of
and it's interesting as well, just in terms of who wins on Saturday, and you know, just from Paul's perspective, because he played a lot more All-Ireland Semi Finals than I did, but you know, just like if Galway win, you know, I mean, how you know, it's in the back of your mind, you know what I mean, and
you don't have to face Limerick in the final, almost extra incentive. Or you know, I mean, and like from a Clare perspective, you know, either way, you know, if they were to win, it's a local derby, you know, north or south of it, so and there'd be huge hype down here, so yeah, just another angle to what hopefully will be a great weekend. Yeah, for sure. Fellas, enjoy it. Paul, thank you, and thank you to the Hurling Pod for lending us to you. Appreciate it.
No problem at all.
And Jamesie, as ever, pleasure. Thanks so much, fellas.
Cheers, Joe.
Hurling on Off the Ball
with Board Gosh Energy. Hurling, it's anyone's game.